All right, I want to welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar is going to focus on the Pfizer vaccine, which has been approved for students that are 16 years or older. But first, I am going to set up our translation. So if you just give me 1 second. So I'm going to have each of our translators translate this open-end message for families that are looking for translation. In just a few minutes, it's not available now, but there'll be a globe on the lower right-hand corner. Simply click on the globe and select the language that you would like to hear this webinar in. And for those of you that need Arabic translation, you should select French. Unfortunately, they don't have Arabic as a listed language, but we do have that translation available. For those of you that need Spanish, click Spanish. And for those of you that need Portuguese, please click Portuguese. So I will first start with asking Sarah to repeat that message in Spanish, and then we'll follow that with Portuguese and Arabic, and then get underway.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos a este webinar. Vamos a hablar de las vacunaciones de los jóvenes de 16 años en adelante. Los que necesiten traducción, las familias que necesiten traducción, más adelante van a poner un botón para poder elegir cuál es el lenguaje que ustedes hablan. Para los que necesitan español, hunden el botón de español. Los que necesiten portugués, hunden portugués. Y los que necesiten árabe, hunden francés, porque desafortunadamente no tenemos el botón de árabe, pero sí tenemos la opción para traducir en árabe.
Thank you, Sarah. Caitlin?
Olá, boa tarde a todos. Estamos aqui hoje para fazer a reunião, o webinar da vacinas e da informação sobre mais vacinas, sobre a vacina da Pfizer para as adolescentes de 16 a mais anos. E hoje a gente vai fazer traduções em espanhol, português e árabe. Então, vai ter um botão embaixo da sua tela e você pode clicar no botão. Se você quiser espanhol, você clica espanhol, português, vai ter uma opção em português. E árabe, você tem que clicar em francês, por causa que ele não tinha a opção de árabe. Então, todos que precisar, todas as famílias que precisarem de tradução, vai estar disponível.
Khadija?
مساء الخير جميعا. نحن هنا في جلسة عبر الإنترنت للمعلومات حول اللقاح المتوفر للطلاب 16 سنة فما فوق. فيرجى للعائلات التي تريد الترجمة باللغة العربية الضغط على الزر فرنش، لأن لأسباب تقنية لا توجد الزر بالعربية. والعائلات التي تبحث عن ترجمة باللغة البرتغيز يضغط على البرتغيز، والعائلات التي تتطلب مساعدة أو ترجمة في اللغة الإسبانية تضغط على الإسبانيش. شكرا.
Great. I'm going to start that now. All right, now that we have our translation established, I am going to get us underway and introduce 3 members from the medical community that we are beyond grateful for dedicating their time to the RPS and Revere community to give us this presentation this evening.
All right.
So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kong, Ms. Lauren Buck, and Dr. Goldfarb, who are going to be our primary presenters tonight. Dr. Kong.
Hi, Richie, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this evening. I'm going to share my slides. All right. So as Richie mentioned, my name is Dr. Natalie Kong. I am a primary care doctor at the MGH Revere Health Center on Ocean Avenue, and I'm also on the Revere Board of Health. And I'll be presenting these slides along with Lauren Buck. She is a nurse, and she's also the director of the Revere Health Department. And a special guest we have this evening is Dr. Ilona Goldfarb, who is a maternal fetal medicine specialist from the Mass General. So just to kick us off, we're obviously talking about the coronavirus, the COVID infection, and with an emphasis on the vaccines that are currently available, particularly for the adolescents in our community. What all the vaccines target is this red spiky thing here. It's a protein that lives on the outside of the virus. And that is our key to preventing the virus from infecting us and our children and from infecting the rest of our family members. So these are the options in the US right now for COVID vaccines. We have 3 options. But as Dr. Gallucci mentioned, we're going to focus on the Pfizer vaccine tonight because that's the one that is available for folks 16 years and older. The other 2 are meant for folks 18 years and older. So as you can see here, the Pfizer vaccine, it's an mRNA vaccine. And what that basically means is mRNA is just these special instructions. We have all these instructions, this mRNA, it already exists in all of our bodies, but this is a special one. It gives us, our bodies, the instructions to build that red spiky thing that I showed in the previous slide. And those instructions teach our body how to make that. And once our body makes that spiky thing, it gets expressed in our cells and we create antibodies that train themselves to fight that red spiky protein. And so if the real COVID ever shows up, your body is already trained and ready to fight it before it can cause any problems. The Pfizer vaccine, as you can see up here, it's 2 doses. So you get your first dose, and then the second dose comes 21 days or 3 weeks later. Some things I want to point out, I'm not a pediatrician, I'm an adult primary care doctor, but I have been paying attention to what other governing bodies of medicine are thinking about the vaccine. I have patients who are pregnant who worry about it, so I pay attention to that. But in preparing for this talk this evening, I wanted to obviously give you all information, up-to-date information from the American Academy of Pediatrics about what they think of the COVID vaccine. And based on the studies that have been done, so far we know that the vaccines are safe in children or adolescents 16 and up, Pfizer at least. And the side effects that they experienced were no different than any of the side effects that adults above the age of 18 experienced when they got that vaccine. Alrighty. So that was, as you can see, from February. This is kind of an interim guidance. It got cut off, but this is from March. And the AAP is basically recommending this vaccine to anyone 16 years of age or older who wants it and can get it. So another thing I just wanted to mention is that vaccines do work. You can see here from the New York Times, this is from nursing homes. So on the other end of the age spectrum, so not obviously any of your kids, much older, but we have data here to show that once vaccine rollouts began, deaths in nursing homes significantly dropped. So the vaccines are effective at protecting the most vulnerable members of our community from getting hospitalized, from getting severe symptoms of COVID, and from dying of COVID, thankfully. All right. Why? So I just showed you information on older folks. Why is this important for you and your family, in particular your children? There's something called herd immunity that I think has been talked about a lot in the media, and I'm sure you've heard about it on the news. Herd immunity is basically what happens when a critical number of folks or a critical percentage of the population gets a vaccine and gets protected from a virus. You can see in the top panel here that the the little like folks here who are in blue have been vaccinated, and then the folks here in yellow or orange, they're infected with COVID. So if only a few people are vaccinated, that leaves all these other gray folks, vulnerable. And for the person who has COVID, the COVID can jump to other folks really easily. And you can see it quickly spreads from person to person if not that many folks are vaccinated. So what we're trying to aim for with herd immunity is the bottom panel right here. So if a ton of folks are vaccinated, remember the vaccinated folks are blue. If a ton of folks are vaccinated, you kind of box out the vaccine. It has nowhere to go. You limit the amount of vulnerable folks who it can spread to, and you effectively cut off the spread of the virus of COVID. So this is what we're aiming for, so that we can get our kids back to school, back to prom, back to sports, just back to all the things that we used to enjoy and do. So that's a message about that. So where are we as a city? This is actually outdated information. This is as of yesterday. But as of yesterday, we are at 31% of Revere residents fully vaccinated. A lot of folks use this magic number of 70% for that magical herd immunity I just described. That 70% is kind of a moving target. We like to, use that number, but that number kind of depends on how contagious or infectious the virus is. So we're not totally sure what that goal is for COVID, but at least in the city, that's kind of what our starting point is. We'd like to see herd immunity achieved by July 4th. And I think, it's all hands on deck. Anyone who wants to get the vaccine should definitely get the vaccine so that we can all reach it together. Getting the vaccine for you and for your children not only protects you and your loved ones, but it prevents your kids from maybe bringing the virus home and maybe passing it along to a grandparent who may be immunocompromised or who may be on chemotherapy, and it prevents them from giving it to a sibling with asthma, who may not have really the healthiest or strongest lungs. So this is just kind of what we can all do to help each other. That's my last slide. I'm going to kick it off and turn it over to our fearless leader, Lauren Buck, for the rest of the talk.
That is eligible for 16 and 17-year-olds to get. Oceanside Ballroom at the Wonderland Tea Stop runs 5 days a week. It's run through East Boston Neighborhood Health Center. If you type in ebnhc.org, or Google East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, at the top of the screen, there's a phone number and a link to register. They give occasionally Pfizer vaccines. They don't give it every day. So this is an option where you'd have to call to verify if they're giving vaccine today or when in the future they would be giving it, but they do give it out. The next option on the list is the Romney Marsh Academy. That's right behind Revere High School at 140 American Legion Highway. On Sundays from 9 to 4, there's a clinic that you can walk up to that is giving the Pfizer vaccine. There might be a bit of a line. You might have to wait in a bit of a line, especially in the earlier hours, closer to 9, 10, or 11. There is an option for pre-registration, and the Sunday clinics at Romney Marsh are exclusively giving Pfizer for the next several weeks. So this is a great option. And the last place I wanted to direct you is revere.org/vaccine, which gives all of these options I mentioned and more. If you are interested in getting a vaccine and don't necessarily need to get Pfizer, but want to get one of them, all of the options in the city are written on that website. And that is it for for the last of the presentation. I think we want to open it up to questions at this point. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Gallucci and Dr. Perella.
All right. If anybody has any questions, they are welcome to put them in the Q&A chat that's located on this webinar or in the chat that is on the YouTube channel, and we will verbalize those and get those answered for anyone. So the first question asks, when will the vaccine be available for a 15-year-old or even younger?
That's a really good question. I was about to put a slide on that, but I chose not to. I should have gone with my instinct. So Pfizer has been studying their vaccine in children as young as 12, and they have a lot of good, positive, preliminary safety and efficacy data. So they just filed this week with the CDC to allow for their vaccine to be given under emergency use authorization to individuals as young as 12 years old. So we're hoping very soon there'll be some approval or some like stamp of approval from the CDC and FDA, and we'll be able to start rolling it out to folks even younger than 16. We can't do it yet. Right now it's only 16, but hopefully in the near future we'll get there.
Thank you. Some questions that we fielded from today. I know people had asked what is the difference between the 3 vaccines? Why 3 different vaccines? And if you could just touch upon each, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, do you want to take this one, Lauren, or do you want me to?
I'll start and then pass it off to you like we usually do. So actually, one thing I have found myself thinking about more and more that people might probably not think about is that most vaccines that you think about are produced by different manufacturers. For example, the flu vaccine has different manufacturers every year, and you probably don't even think about it. You just get a flu vaccine, or you get a hepatitis A or B vaccine. All of those vaccines, there's different manufacturers for all of those, just like there's different manufacturers for all of these. This is a new vaccine. Obviously, we're in a pandemic, so there's a lot of attention directed towards each of these vaccines, and that's a good thing. But I also want to emphasize that, you know, our 16 and 17-year-olds need to get Pfizer. Any parents out there, any vaccine is a good vaccine. The best vaccine for you is the one that you get. There's a lot of options out there right now, here in Revere and throughout the state. So any vaccine is a good vaccine. So I'll start to talk a little bit about the differences, and then I'll let Dr. Kong finish off. Moderna and Pfizer are mRNA vaccines, which Dr. Kong explained earlier. They work a little bit differently than the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The difference is how they deliver the good stuff into you, the stuff that helps you fight off the COVID vaccine if it were introduced to you. 2 important components about the differences between all 3 vaccines that I want to make sure I highlight. The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine are a 2-dose vaccine. Pfizer, you have to come back and get a second dose in 21 days. Moderna, you have to come back and get a second dose in 28 days. And Johnson & Johnson is a 1-dose vaccine. There's no real, the reason for that is the way they were made, the way they were manufactured. And so I will let Dr. Kong explain maybe more of the scientific mRNA versus viral vector vaccines. But all 3 of them are really good at what they do. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Dr. Kong.
Yeah, one other point I wanted to make is that when the Pfizer and Moderna, those are, you need 2 vaccines for it to be considered like a full dose of the vaccine. So if you get Pfizer, your second dose should be Pfizer. You can't mix and match, unfortunately, or at least we discourage folks from doing that. So if you start with Moderna, you should finish with Moderna, and vice versa. That's just one other point I want to make. Yeah, the other kind of more nitty-gritty differences are just that Pfizer and Moderna are both mRNA vaccines. They use mRNA, which is a component of DNA, essentially, which is what makes us us. It gives our bodies the instructions for, the proteins that makes the color of our hair, the color of our eyes, things like that. So that's all in our bodies already. Johnson & Johnson uses something very similar, except it's called DNA. DNA is what kind of becomes RNA in our bodies, so or mRNA in our bodies. So it's just kind of one step ahead or one step behind the mRNA. But suffice it to say, they all carry some version of instructions for how to make that red spike protein that sits on the top of every coronavirus cell, and that's what we're targeting, and that's what the antibodies are targeting.
So we have a school-based question and a different question from a parent. I'll take the school-based question. It says, will the vaccine be a mandatory demand before schools are open next school year, like the flu vaccine is? So right now, the flu vaccine is not a mandate, but a strong encouragement. Again, this webinar was set up to provide information so that you can make an informed decision about the vaccine, but there's certainly not a mandate at this time in terms of school policy, in terms of your student has to have this in order to return to school. So a separate question that I may bring in Dr. Goldfarb here is concerns around pregnancy or future fertility, if parents are thinking kind of down the line long-term effects about the vaccine. I would turn that over to you, Dr. Goldfarb, if you could kind of address pregnancy and fertility.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for having me, and thank you to all the parents for coming and thinking about vaccination. I'm very happy to answer this question, and this is a question that I've been talking about with my patients for several months already. First, I'd like to emphasize that vaccination is very safe. It is very safe for our teens. It is very safe for our young adults and our older adults, and that there's no evidence in any of the medical studies so far that there's any correlation between the vaccine and fertility. We know that some myths and rumors got started on the internet around the time that the vaccines were getting their acceptance. And I think, you know, there are people out in the world who are really worried about vaccinations, and somehow this myth started circulating around social media and through the various news outlets. But all the scientists who study pregnancy and fertility all have confirmed that there's no scientific reason why the COVID vaccines would cause infertility. Going a step further, the Pfizer company that makes the vaccine, as well as the Moderna company and the Johnson & Johnson company, have studied this question on animals. That's what always has to happen with vaccines before they roll out to humans. They've specifically looked at the effects of these vaccines on animal fertility and pregnancy, and have found no problems at all, no complications with fertility. Second of all, we know already now there are millions of people around the globe, millions of women around the whole world and in our country as well, that have received these vaccines. And we haven't seen any signs that there's an increased risk for miscarriage, for premature birth, or for infertility. So all of that is very, very reassuring. What we don't know is from the companies themselves, when they were studying the vaccine safety and efficacy, fertility was not a question that they were monitoring. They were making sure that patients weren't having severe allergic reactions and that their immunity was effective after the vaccine. But they weren't answering the specific question about fertility. That's why we have to look at these other sources. And so far, those are all very reassuring. Most of our big societies that govern the practice of medicine for women, both adolescents and older women that are considering fertility, recommend that getting the COVID-19 vaccine before you're pregnant is the very best, because that ensures that you're protected that you keep your family and your community safe, like we've been talking about. And also, if you do become pregnant in the near future, you're safe during pregnancy from COVID-19, because COVID-19 is a dangerous virus for pregnant women. In addition, when you have immunity after your vaccine, and then you become pregnant later, some studies have even demonstrated that you can pass that immunity to your baby. So that is an extra benefit of getting vaccinated before pregnancy. But even for our young women who aren't quite thinking about pregnancy in the near future, we, as I mentioned, do not anticipate that this vaccine would cause any harms or problems for the future.
Thank you, Dr. Goldfarb. Dr. Perella?
Yep, we have a question from the YouTube viewer, and the question is asking about the possible third wave of inoculations, booster shots that are they expected in the fall, and what is the most current information regarding them?
I can start this off and pass the baton to Lauren. That's a really good question that I don't honestly have the full answer to. I know Moderna they're conducting studies right now of a booster shot that they've developed. Booster shots are good because there's a lot more variants circling around, a lot more variants of COVID circling around the world now that weren't in existence when Moderna and Pfizer were initially being rolled out and when they were initially studied. So the boosters give us a chance to enhance our immunity specifically to those variants. So that's one good thing about boosters. So far, it seems like the immunity is going to last hopefully for a year. And that means that, every year we may need to get a booster, very similar to what happens with the flu vaccine, What we do know, just to take a little step back, is that when you get the coronavirus infection, after you are infected, your body builds natural antibodies to that infection. And we're coming to an understanding that immunity, that those antibodies last about 3 months. And it looks like the antibodies to the COVID vaccines, the antibodies you make from the vaccines, not from the actual infection, hopefully will last at least a year, and they definitely last longer than the 3 months from the infection that you have. So even if you have had COVID in the past, we do recommend that you still strongly consider, and hopefully get the vaccine, because you will have antibodies hanging around your system for a lot longer. But as I mentioned before, there are variants that exist now that I think complicate a bit of our fight against COVID. And because of the existence of these variants, and because we're not totally sure exactly how long the antibodies will last in our system after the first series of vaccines, we're starting to study it. And I think that we're probably moving towards that, at least in the near future. But unfortunately, I don't have like a definitive yes or no answer yet. I know it's being studied, and we're sort of preparing for the worst as if we're going to need to do it for everyone, but just don't have anything definitive yet. Lauren, Dr. Goldfarb, anything to add?
Nope, that sums it up. One thing I will add is, let's get as many people vaccinated this time around. Let's try to get to 100%. Let's make that a goal.
I think something to understand is every time the COVID virus infects someone new, it replicates and it multiplies. And every time the virus does that, that's when it has an opportunity to create a variant. And that's how these variants are made. So that's why variants, we didn't talk about variants a year ago. That wasn't a thing. It was just about COVID. But then later down, after, within the last year and some odd months, variants started popping up. the UK variant, the South African variant, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because so many of us around the globe were getting infected. And at each time that virus was given an opportunity to try to be a little bit smarter than our medicines and our vaccines. So the more we can protect ourselves using either a vaccine or masking up or remaining socially distant, washing our hands, the more we prevent the virus from getting smarter.
All right, I'm going to pause for a second to let our translators catch up. And a big area of interest from our 16 plus students, those that are 16 or older, was reaction to receiving the vaccine. Some specific questions about all of the information going around about reactions to the second vaccine. I didn't know if you wanted to touch upon what we've experienced as a medical community, or not we, you, in terms of how people are having reactions or no reactions to the doses.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Gallucci.
You
Oh,
are.
yeah. I feel like this is my my passion statement here. This is something that a lot of people ask people who are vaccinating. So they sit down at the vaccination table and they say, what's going to happen to me? And so the one thing that I want to emphasize is reactions to a vaccine or medication for that matter, or foods for that matter, but we're talking about vaccine today, are very individualized. So I, Dr. Kong, Dr. Goldfarb, can't tell you what your reaction to a vaccine is going to be. There's a lot of fear out there of people. This is a very common thing I hear. My sister, my friend felt this after this vaccine, after the second dose, and I'm scared it's going to happen to me. What I'd say to everyone out there is, please take those stories with a big grain of salt, put them into perspective, and recognize that everyone has a different reaction to a vaccine. Some people could feel nothing for both doses. Some people could feel flu-like symptoms after the first dose and nothing after the second, or switch that. It could happen in reverse. Some people could get only a sore arm. Some people could get have to take Tylenol because, or sleep for, or have a nap for, the next day after. It's very, very individualized, and please don't be scared off from getting first dose, or more importantly, well, not more importantly, just as importantly, coming back for a second. The second dose does not automatically mean you're going to have a worse reaction than the first. Absolutely not. It's very, very individualized, and recognize that most people have very mild symptoms with these vaccines. And the stories you hear from neighbors and friends and family members doesn't mean that that is going to be your reaction. And I think I'll throw it to Dr. Kong now for any more updates.
No, that's pretty much it. I got Pfizer, and the first dose, while I couldn't move my arm, it was super sore. And then the second time around, I was, waiting for the nurse to give me the vaccine, and I was just looking at my phone. And next thing I know, she's putting a Band-Aid on my arm, and I didn't even feel it going in. So that was just my personal experience. But in speaking to a lot of my patients, their experience is the opposite or just totally different. So it's not individualized, but I will say the two most common side effects, really for all the vaccines, not just for Pfizer, is fatigue. You're going to feel a little tired. That just means your body is working extra hard to create those antibodies. Fatigue, and then soreness at the injection site. So your arm might be a little sore for a couple hours or for the day following the vaccine. And then a couple of other side effects I've heard about that we've documented are like a mild headache. You might even get chills or a fever. So those are just some other things that you can expect, and that your child can expect.
And you certainly get to choose which arm. It does not have to be your writing arm.
Dr. Goldfarb, I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add in also that judging from our experiences of our own patients and friends and family that have been vaccinated, but also looking at the CDC collected data from tens of thousands of patients that have been vaccinated with both Pfizer and Moderna across the whole country. These side effects, the sore, itchy arm, the tiredness, the headache, some people even have a low-grade fever, some chills. These happen several hours later, so it's not, instantaneously after you get the vaccine. It may be the next morning or later that evening, and they generally don't last more than a day. And then they go away, and then you're up and running and doing all the things that you would normally do. So it's not, even if you do have those side effects, and some people have no side effects at all. I felt very tired, just wanted to sleep, and then all of a sudden it was over and I got up and did my thing. My husband had zero side effects at all, so people are a bit different. But even if you do have side effects, they don't last for long. You can rest and hydrate and take some Tylenol. If your teen has those symptoms, you can give them some Tylenol and some extra hydration, and they'll be fine pretty quickly in just a few hours.
And one specific question related to this topic, and building upon what Dr. Kong had said earlier, we did get questions about if I've had COVID and I received the vaccine, is my reaction going to be any different from a person who has not had COVID? So I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that specifically.
Sure. Yeah, I actually don't think there is any, as far as I know, I haven't heard of any correlation between whether you have a history of getting COVID and then is your reaction to the vaccine any more severe or any more mild? Dr. Goldfarb, I haven't, anecdotally, I haven't even come across anything. It's kind of what Lauren said, everyone's response is going to be individualized.
Yep, exactly. I haven't seen any scientific reports, just people telling us different stories.
We have some questions that centered around this afternoon around the connection between students getting the vaccination and not being able to pass it along, and how that's correlated to not actually getting the virus itself. So what is the connection between being able to, once you get vaccinated, that you don't pass that virus along? Is that correlated to the percentages of not getting the virus in the first place?
You want to take that one, Lauren, or do you want me to? The getting the vaccine, there's a couple of benefits to getting it. The one that we care most about are whether or not you get severe symptoms of COVID. So, the difficulty breathing, chest pain, some folks have needed to be on a ventilator. Some folks needed extra oxygen, especially those who have a history of lung disease or heart disease. So that's kind of what we, worried about the most. And obviously, people have, as we know, have unfortunately passed away from COVID. So those were the main things that we looked at when these vaccines were studied. And thankfully, these vaccines are very effective at preventing you from needing to be hospitalized for COVID infections and from from getting severe symptoms that would warrant being on a ventilator or being intubated or needing extra oxygen. So first and foremost, that's I think the biggest, most important benefit of getting these vaccines. The other benefit that we have come to realize is that in addition to protecting you from getting those severe symptoms and from getting COVID at all, you also prevent yourself from transmitting it to others. So if you're out, at whatever sport you play, or you're hang out with your friends or whatever, and you come home, if you've been vaccinated, you are less likely to carry that virus with you and pass it on to a younger sibling that is not eligible for the vaccine right now and may have asthma, right? So you prevent your sibling from getting asthma, from getting the vaccine if they have asthma or whatever, and you also prevent yourself from passing on that virus to your your parents, to a grandparent who may be immunocompromised or may have cancer and is on chemotherapy. So, if you, and this goes not just for our teens, but adults too. You're going to work, you come back home from work. So for me, example, I work in a clinic. I'm still seeing patients every day in person, and I don't have to worry as much about bringing this vaccine home to my husband or to my parents or to my sister, because we're showing that it reduces what we call transmission rates. So that's when the virus jumps from one person to the other. So if you remember that herd immunity slide, that yellow person who has COVID, it can't jump to any of those other folks and infect them either. So I hope that answers the question.
All right. We have a specific question about if I'm 18 or my student is 18, can they get any of the three? And I think the answer to that is yes, but I'll just let someone confirm.
Yes, it is. Yes, you can get all three. When you hit 18, you're good to go for all three.
And then another very specific question in the chat. If you are infected with COVID, how soon after should you get vaccinated? Is there a waiting period?
I can start, Dr. Kong, and if you want to add in, just let me know. If you are actively infectious with COVID, you are obviously in isolation, and so we don't want you leaving your home and potentially infecting others. So what the guidance has said is that if you have COVID, from the date of your first symptom or from the date of your positive test, you have to wait until after your infectious period is over. To be very, very safe, we've usually said 14 days to be just extremely cautious. So if you are actively isolating from a COVID infection right now, you need to wait until your infectious period is over to get the vaccine. After it is over, you are okay to get the vaccine. So you don't have to wait 3 months. You don't have to wait 6 months. After your infectious period is over, you are okay to get the vaccine.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stems from the fact that, like I mentioned previously, we're coming to understand that the antibodies you get from a COVID infection tend to last for about 3 months. So you are, technically protected, I guess, for that 3-month period. So I think in the beginning when vaccines were being rolled out, we didn't have the abundant supply that we have now. So some places would give you an option like, hey, you can wait. And you still can wait if you prefer. It's hard to know exactly when you got infected with COVID, and if you're gonna really try to be exact about that 90-day period. But if you want, you can wait, but you don't have to. Nothing bad is gonna happen to you. It doesn't mean you're gonna have a particularly severe side effect to the vaccine when you get it, nothing like that. So yeah, you're able to, if you want to, you can wait, but you certainly don't have to. The choice is yours.
A interesting question from a student asked about the composition between the first shot and the second shot. Are they one and the same? Are they different? Because I know there's a lot of talk about the second shot, but if you could just explain as to whether they're one and the same or different.
Yeah, so they are the same shot. They're the exact same composition. The studies that have been performed, in order for us to achieve the same level of protection that has been advertised and has been reported in the studies, it's important to get both shots. And it's important to also time it and try to do it within that time period. So for Moderna, first shot and then second one for 4 weeks later. For Pfizer, first shot and then second one 21 days or 3 weeks later. So that timing is important. I'll let Lauren, I think, comment on another common question, which is what happens if I can't get it within that time frame. But yeah, the doses themselves are exactly the same, but just what we saw in the data is that in order to really achieve that level of immunity and protection, we really should get both doses, and we urge you to get both doses. For me, I tell my patients, I don't consider you vaccinated, or I don't consider this series to be complete until you have received both doses of either Moderna or Pfizer. Johnson & Johnson is different. That's an exception. That's just one dose.
Yep, and I'll just comment. So as Dr. Kong mentioned, the studies and the the vaccines were the timeframes that we have been giving this whole time for Pfizer, 3 weeks, for Moderna, 4 weeks. Those numbers, those windows, were determined from the manufacturers to be the most effective in order to have full immunity. We understand that life happens, right? And so, sometimes there's a situation where you can't come directly on day 21 or day 28. And so they build in windows. Obviously we want you to get as close to day 21 and day 28 as possible. There's a little tiny gap on the front end of that if you need to get it a little bit early, very few days. There's a longer window on the end of it, so about 2 weeks after that 21 or 28 days is okay. And we know that if you stay within those windows, your second dose is as effective as if you get it right on day 21 or day 28. We want to try to make sure that everyone tries to keep to those appointments. And one thing I will say is, most places that you go have arranged for a second dose at that kind of marker, that 21-day marker, that 28-day marker, and try to keep those appointments as much as possible to get right on schedule. There's a little wiggle room because life happens.
All right, I'm going to ask Dr. Kong to share that final slide as I close us up. So the purpose of tonight's webinar was to highlight that the city of Revere is once again at the forefront in arranging a vaccine clinic for students that are 16 years or older. And there's 2 locations that you can receive the Pfizer vaccine, which is approved for students that are 16 or older, the Oceanside Ballroom at Wonderland T-Stop, and the Rumney Marsh Academy, which is our middle school at 140 American Legion Highway, and that is on Sundays from 9 to 4. And you can walk right up. There's no appointment needed for that vaccine clinic. And I would just like to, as someone who was vaccinated at the Rumney Marsh Academy Clinic, I can't say enough about the work that Lauren, the Revere Board of Health, and all of our school-based nurses and city nurses have done. We were out at the forefront of the vaccination process. We held one of the first vaccine clinics for first responders in the state. And the vaccine clinic is a well-oiled machine. You are in, you are out in a timely manner. You feel welcomed, you feel supported. Any questions you may have, they are willing and able to answer. And just everyone who has gone through this clinic has just raved about how great it has been during what can be a tense moment. And I would strongly encourage, if you are considering and have made the decision to get the Pfizer vaccine, we would love to have you visit the Rumney Marsh Academy, because you are going into an experienced and effective vaccination clinic. And with that, I am going to first thank Caitlin, Khadijah, and Sarah for providing translation this evening. They are members of the RPS community. Sarah and Caitlin are Revere High School health aides that work alongside our nurses, and Khadijah is the parent liaison at the Rumney Marsh Academy. Thank you so very much, the three of you. We really appreciate it. And of course, I want to thank Lauren Buck, Dr. Kong, and Dr. Goldfarb for providing their medical expertise, but also their support that has been unwavering for well over a year now in supporting the Revere Public Schools and the city of Revere in really every way possible. So thank you all very much. We are eternally grateful and very appreciative for all of your medical expertise. All right. I hope everybody has a great evening. This will be posted. It is being recorded, and we will be sure to send it out to all families who may have not been able to make it this evening. Have a great night.